All right, today we're talking with Navy veteran John Miles, host of the Passion Struck podcast and author of the Passion Struck book. John, thanks for being here today. Got a lot of great things to talk about, things you've done since being in the Navy, but we'd like to start off with taking us back and tell us what you did in the Navy.
Joe, thanks for having me on this show, and I always appreciate it when I get to speak with fellow veterans and to a veteran audience. So, very excited about this. So, I ended up commissioning through the Naval Academy. I went through the Naval Academy prep school. So, I spent a little bit of time enlisted while I was at the prep school before going through the academy. And my dream had always been to go special forces. And so I had been going down the path of training to become candidate for the SEAL program. And I played rugby at the academy and had a couple traumatic brain injuries, which precluded me from taking that path because I was having recurring symptoms. So I ended up becoming what today is a Naval Information Warfare Officer, at the time, cryptologist. So I worked for the NSA.
Yeah. I always wondered, like, I knew some guys going through flight school, and they were rugby players, and some of them even rugby players from the academy. And I'm like, man, you're just asking to like lose the whole air contract or something. But it's a tough sport. Um, so what did walk us through a little bit of how long were you in the Navy and what were some of the things you did, and then talk a little bit about your transition when you got out.
Yeah, my full time in both active duty and reserves was about 11 years. But I ended up really getting to fulfill that dream of getting to work with special forces because during my first tour, which was in Rota, Spain, I was stationed at Naval Security Group Rota, and out of the blue, I got a call from the NSA saying that they were trying to create a special cadre of cryptologic operators who would start deploying with raiders and SEAL teams. And would I like to start this cadre off? And so I got assigned to Naval Special Warfare Unit 10, got to handpick a team of 10 enlisted people and a senior chief. And we started working with them, trying to create this um, expeditionary force that would go in as needed with the teams on an operational basis. And what I'm really excited about is this is now a whole dominance force that has hundreds of people in it. And so I'm really excited about the legacy that we formed. But I got to go on a few deployments myself with the teams. And so it really helped bring full circle that aspiration I had. And then after that, I went on a two-star staff down at what's now JADF South, doing counter drug interdiction out of Key West, Florida. And coming off of that, I had gotten recruited by a number of the agencies that were represented at that command. So I applied for CIA, FBI, DEA, etc. And I ended up getting selected by a few of them, chose the FBI. And I think this is where my story gets really interesting because I um, left the military a week before I was going to go to Quantico. And I'm about halfway through that week when all of a sudden I get a call from my detailer out of the blue saying, unfortunately, your class has been recycled. And I said, well, what caused that? And they said it was one of the first times that Congress couldn't pass a budget. And so out of precaution, they ended up recycling the class. Well, at the time, I thought naively that was going to be maybe a month or two delay. It turned
You
out to
mean
be
like your
almost
FBI
40.
class?
My FBI class, it
Oh,
turned
okay.
out to be almost 40 months. So I was in this position where, I mean, most people have some idea of what they're going to do coming out of the military. I had that plan. All of a sudden, it's ripped from me. So, in a matter of days, I'm forced with this situation where I have to go into plan B immediately because I had no income coming in at that point, and I'm married. And the FBI, I asked them, what should I do? They go, just find a job in the interim, and then quit when the class becomes available again. So this is where it gets really interesting because I needed something in a matter of days or weeks. And
Yeah.
so I went, so my instincts were lean in on your academy background. And so at the time, we didn't have the internet like we do now. So I asked them for the Service Academy directory. So it was this book that was about 1,000 pages in length, and it had the names, addresses, and phone and contact information of living members of all the academies. And I just started randomly going through it, looking for opportunities that looked of interest, and then either cold calling or sending at that point actual letters to alumni, talking about my background and my desire. And that led me in a matter of about a month to three possible opportunities. One, well, I guess there were four. One was with SAIC, one was with Booz Allen, another was with Honda working on an assembly line, and the last one was with WorldCom working as a quality control testing. And luckily, I ended up with Booz Allen, which ended up for me being the best choice out of all of them. But I know, I guess more than a lot of veterans, what it's like to be forced into a situation where you thought you had a plan, it's completely blown up on you, and you have to quickly reposition yourself and act.
Yeah. All right, back talk with Navy veteran John Miles, host of the Passion Struck podcast and the Passion Struck book. So, John, you talk about the using your networking abilities to go back and look at the Naval Academy Alumni Association to make some contacts. I had a similar experience. I'm not even sure if the organization still exists, but a long time ago, there was an organization called the Marine Corps Executive Association, which I think it was either all officers or most officers, senior staff NCOs. It was just it was like a phone book. Like somebody paid $50 to be a member, and they put their name, phone number, address, email in there, and what their current job was. And I remember flipping through that, and I found a guy that worked at an airline that I wanted to get hired at, and I contacted him, Ray Lanier, and he wrote me a letter of recommendation and actually got me hired at the airline that I ended up working for right out of the Marine Corps.
That's
So,
awesome.
I mean, that's just a lesson for networking. I mean, good, nowadays, okay, look on LinkedIn for people that work at the company you work at, whatever. But, the true two people that didn't know each other at all, but we had some, loose common bond, and he was willing to help me out, and he got me hired there. And I'm still an airline pilot today. So, that's what reminded me of when you went to the Academy Alumni Association. So you ended up working for Booz Allen.
Yeah, and I'll just explain one other anecdote, and that is I went in through an Air Force Academy grad named Sheila.
Mm-hmm.
Sheila didn't end up hiring me. She recommended me to retired Vice Admiral Mike McConnell and another gentleman named Gary Covage. And Mike McConnell actually had remembered me because he was the head of NSA when I was put in to lead that new detachment serving
Huh.
special operators. And so he had remembered who I was and my impact. So
Okay.
they offered me a position, and I spent a little bit of time working out of Tyson's Corner, their headquarters. And then they ended up moving me to San Diego because SPAWAR, um, renamed now, was moving from Charleston out to San Diego.
Spay War. Yeah. They changed the name. It's not called Spay War anymore.
No, it's not.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I know I've got a lot of friends that worked at Booz Allen and SAIC and all that, but I remember Spay War was a big deal a few years ago. So, um, ultimately, did you get out of the defense contracting industry and start doing other things?
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to say, because I know you're talking to a lot of entrepreneurs, I always had that entrepreneurial bug inside of me.
Yeah.
And for a long period of my career, it showed up as being an intrapreneur. where
Right.
I had entrepreneurial tendencies within these companies. So I'll just give one example within Booz Allen. I was on their side that was doing cybersecurity work, and I happened to go to this conference. Um, Long story short, I had a love of Corvettes, saw a guy wearing Corvette shirt, used my networking skills again. Turns out he was the civilian head instructor at Top Gun. We got into talking. He asked me about Booz Allen doing distance learning. I had kept up on all the different things we were doing, so I was able to say yes. This led to an $8 million contract 18 months later, where we started to build Strike Fighter Online to serve the Marine Corps and Navy aviation communities, and it ended up becoming an $180 million program per year for Booz Allen about a decade later. So,
Wow.
just an idea of how I took an opportunity and turned it into a whole new program for Booz Allen and a whole new business line for the company. But I left Booz Allen. I ended up going to Anderson Consulting, where I led the cybersecurity practice for the Southwest and their global incident response and ethical hacking practice. And unfortunately, I was there for a short period of time, had just put on partner when Enron happened, and the company pretty much evaporated within about a month of that association with Enron. So again, I found myself in this position where I had to make a career pivot and decided at this point to go into Fortune 500 companies.
Hmm.
So I became one of the first chief information security officers for a company called Lendlease. And I always had this desire that I wanted to become a CIO. So I started to really take on these entrepreneurial assignments to learn as much as I could about how do you expand out of the cybersecurity role into these different disciplines,
Hmm.
and started to take paths that would get me exposure to networking and infrastructure and application development and operations so I could get well rounded in all the disciplines. And following Lendlease, did about 7 or 8 years with Lowe's, running operations, software development. My last position was as the chief data officer, and then became a CIO at Dell, and then eventually pivoted into private equity, where I became a partner in a private equity firm, and then the CEO of a couple of their portfolio companies.
Wow. Yeah. So, what was that when you finally went the entrepreneurial route? What was that? Because you're very stable corporate type career post Navy for the most part. What was like that like trying to walking away from that or the stability of it and looking at entrepreneurship?
Well, I mean, that is the most difficult gap to to
Taking the
cross.
jump, taking the leap.
Well, I have an interesting story. So all the way back during my time at Lowe's, I started to get these internal callings. You know, you could say they were from God, from the universe, from whatever, but I was kind of being told you're not walking down the path that you were put here to do, and you're not using your gifts in the way that you're supposed to make a difference in the world. And I was called to solve it, to serve at the time. The words I was given were the lonely, the beaten, the broken, the hopeless of the world. And as a Fortune 500 person at the time, I'm like, what in the heck am I supposed to do with this? Who are these people I'm supposed to serve? How am I supposed to do it? And so I kept going on my career, and in the background, my mind would come back to that. And I was trying to figure out what the path was. And it really was a lightning bolt that hit me in November of 2017. I went to the gym that morning. At the time, well, I should say it. I decided after doing the private equity gig that there was a way that I could do this and do it in a way that I could start serving them, but not be a master to them. So I
Mhm.
started a company at the time called Ovesto. And today, a lot of people have heard of fractional CXOs, fractional chief marketing officer or CEO. But at the time, when I started doing this in 2014, it was pretty a nascent industry. So I started this firm. I partnered with private equity firms and venture capital firms and developed a team of about 20 operators. And we would go into these companies as these fractional CXO types, helping to reposition, repivot the companies. And I grew that to, to 8-figure revenue stream over about a 3-year period.
Yeah.
And I was in the midst of that when kind of a lightning bolt moment happened to me. I went to work. I left the house, took my daughter to school, went to the gym like I typically did in the morning. And this morning, I happened to go to Orange Theory, and they had an electrical fire in the AC system. So I ended up coming home early. And when I got home, I walked in on an active burglary that was happening to my house, where the intruder ended up pointing my own handgun on me.
Oh, wow.
And I was able to evade him, got out of the house, um, was dealing with that, and 3 or 4 days later, one of my best friends committed suicide.
Mm.
And so those two jolts really awoken to me, because even though I was doing this Avesto thing, I wasn't really fulfilled in what I was doing. And it really gave me this wake up call. You've been getting this calling for a long time. What are you waiting for?
Yeah.
So at that point, I really did 2 years of really deep introspection, which led me to writing the book Passion Struck, and coming up with this whole formula, which is basically, how do you close this gap between wanting to do something different in your life that you're passionate about and actually being struck enough to do it. And so I implemented the principles that I have in the book, and that led me to the creation of Passion Struck, the podcast, the book, the educational content we do now, everything else.
Wow. That's awesome. What are some of the things you do on your podcast?
So the podcast is really meant to help people figure out, how do you live a more fulfilling life? So it's all about the art and science of human flourishing. So I do 3 episodes a week, and two of them really go into, I would say, the science or practical experiences from people I interview about human flourishing. So yesterday, I interviewed Laura and Isabel Hoff, who are the daughters of Wim Hof, who some of the viewers may or listeners may know from the Wim Hof method, which is a method of using breath work, mindset, etc., cold techniques to
Yeah.
really deal with stress and mental health difficulties, as he learned to do as he was coping with the suicide of his wife at the time. So I have episodes like that. And last week, for instance, I did episodes with um, two behavioral scientists, one on the topic of mattering, Gordon Flett, another with Emily Falk, who is a professor at University of Pennsylvania. And we really covered the neuroscience of how do you change. So what I'm trying to do is show, not just in a self-help way, but in a scientific way, how you can use behavioral change to change your life for the better. And then typically I do a weekly solo podcast where I really hyper focus on a certain topic. This week I'm doing it on serendipity, and how that impacts your path to fulfillment.
That's awesome. And then you also have the Passion Struck book. Is that based off of what you've been doing on the podcast, or how is that related?
No, it was really based on that 2 year period where I had been studying for a while a number of leaders, and how do these leaders go from being just like the rest of us to all of a sudden being so struck by this resolve to solve a problem they see, that they're willing to risk it all. They're willing to put their career on the risk. They're willing to put their finances on the risk, their reputation on the risk. So I started to interview big name people like Jeff Bezos and Keith Crotch, who's former Assistant Secretary of State um, Admiral Stavridis,
Hmm.
astronauts, you name it, Derek Jeter, to understand what was this pattern that I was seeing. And so I initially saw about 35 different things that they were all doing in common, and I really boiled it down to 12 principles that are outlined in the book. And then I spent 2 years implementing these principles, doing me search on myself. I found that they worked, and that there was really something here. And then that's what I wrote about in the book, was how to implement these principles in your own life.
And so, like, can you give us a couple of examples, like principles that, like, daily things you work on or read or do to help force you into a positive change?
No, they're a bit larger than that. I mean,
Okay.
there are takeaways in each chapter that are more tactical like that, but these are more strategic. So there's six
Mhm.
mindset shifts, six behavior shifts. So an example of a mindset shift is the third one. I call the mosquito auditor. And so the way it starts is you have to become a mission angler. So you need to figure out the problem that you're meant to solve. So what do you want your future self to be? Then the next thing you have to confront is fear. So it's called the fear confronter mind shift. So once you've confronted the fears that you have, and typically your biggest fears are self-created. So I call this you become the visionary arsonist of the very things that you want to do in your life. The biggest barrier that gets in our way is the people that we surround ourselves with. So the mosquito auditor I came up with because I was trying to think of a way of a metaphor to explain this. And I happened to hear a radio show that was talking about what is the most dangerous animal on the planet. And like many of the listeners, I thought it was a shark or a venomous snake or a deadly spider. And it turns out it's the mosquito. And when I thought about it, a mosquito is so benign, yet they take millions of lives per year. The same with the people we most closely associate with. We think they're benign, but really they are having a profound influence on the trajectory that we want for our lives. So I came up with three different types: the invisible suffocator, which is kind of the glass half empty; the bloodsucker, which are the type that want to drain every ounce of blood from you to get their way; and the pain in the ass. And in the book, I go through, examples of how each one would show up in your personal life and in your career. And then in the behavioral shift section, I have something called the boundary magnifier, which kind of plays into this. So once you know who these mosquitoes are, then you need to take a step of putting boundaries in place to insulate yourself from them or protect yourself from their influence. So that's kind of how the book is set up.
It's so funny because um, I've always, over the years, I've learned that, that these mosquitoes always buzzing around. I'm like, I'll have some, crazy idea that while I'm trying to flesh out the idea myself, I don't really want to tell people about it, especially people that are like, that know me, like close to me. Like, if maybe uh, you know, maybe somebody who I know knows a lot about this stuff, I'll tell them my idea because it's relevant and appropriate for them. But like the normal people I'm hanging around that know nothing about what I'm thinking about, I just don't even want to tell people about it because their reactions are oftentimes very negative or whatever, and that kind of squashes your creativeness. And I try to keep my cards close to my belly when I'm fleshing out a new idea. Like I remember years ago when I was telling people about I want to start a podcast. They're like, "What? What do you mean? Why would you want to do that?" Like, it's just sometimes the silliest little comment from somebody you trust or like can just put a damper on things. So I don't even want to go there.
Yeah, I mean, I got a great story of that. There's a prominent person in Tampa who I sought out for advice, and he had made like a $700 million personal profit off of a company that he had created. And I went to him and I said, I'm thinking about doing this, radical idea. I'm going to start this company. Didn't know it was going to call Passion Struck, but
Huh?
I want to start becoming really a person who's helping people create lives where they feel like they truly matter. And I'm going to start a podcast. I want to start getting into video. I'm going to write books, do all this stuff. And he goes, people tell me to do that stuff all the time, but do you realize how difficult it is, John? Do you realize that you've got a minuscule opportunity to be successful at that? And he was really trying to push me to not do it at all.
Really?
And I'm so glad I didn't listen to him, because 70 million downloads later, obviously the podcast has been impacting people's lives. And but there are voices like that come to us, like they did with you. And
Hmm.
I think you ultimately, your gut knows what it's calling you to do. And I think if you can match a problem that you're called to solve with the innate talents that God gave you,
Hmm.
and you put them to use, you're going to find a way to make it work.
Yeah. Like sometimes I'll be fleshing out a new crazy idea. I won't even tell my wife. Like I don't even want to, because I don't even know. I got to do some research and dig for a while and sit on it. I'm like I don't even want to tell my wife because I don't know what her reaction is going to be. And then I will tell her eventually when it's farther down the road. And then all of a sudden she'll tell like some friends when we're out doing something with people, and I'm like, why'd you tell them that? And she's like, why wouldn't I tell them? I'm like, well, did you see the reaction? Yeah, but I'm like, well, that's why I don't want to tell people, because I don't want to see their reaction. I don't want. Yeah, you're in a very when you're a creative mindset, you're in a very fragile. Your idea is very very fragile, and somebody could easily just squash it and be done with it. And so until it becomes more concrete, I really don't want to share it with the wrong people. And
No,
a
absolutely.
new idea, eventually you're going to have to socialize the idea to test it out and stuff, but make sure you're testing it with the right kind of people, and you're able to take a few hits without getting discouraged about your idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're getting close to the end of our time, John. So tell us where we can find your book, Passion Struck.
You can find the book where all books are sold. So your local bookstore, hopefully, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. And I have two more books coming out within the next year. One is a children's book called You Matter, Luma. And then I have another novel coming out on the topic of mattering and how to rebuild it in our personal lives, at work, in our relationships, and across our communities. And the best places to find me are at johnrmiles.com or passionstruck.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing your uh, successful career story and entrepreneurial success story, John. Appreciate it. I do want to give you the last word. If you're talking to people getting out of the military, maybe somebody's gotten out a few years ago and they're doing the corporate thing or the defense contractor thing, but they've got that entrepreneurial itch, looking to run their own business, start up their own show. What kind of advice comes to mind?
Well, I have two bits of advice. One, you're never too old to start, because I didn't start this until I was in my mid to late 40s. The other is, looking back, I wish I would have done this much earlier in my career and not have put it off, because the safety crutch I thought I had by having the safe job and the safe career was really keeping me from the fulfillment that I feel on a daily basis by doing something that I think truly is making a difference in people's lives. So, two bits of advice: don't wait. If you're struggling on how do you cross that chasm,
Mm-hmm.
my book is a great opportunity to figure out how to close it, or listen to the podcast. But don't wait, and know that you have it inside of you to make your dreams a reality.
Awesome. Great advice. All right. Thanks, John. These two veterans are Oscar Mike.
Thank you, Jeff.